I think it's we need to discuss the role of the major digital platforms and whether or not they are equipped to deal with this kind of thing during a disaster.
Let's bring in a few experts who are trying to find ways to fight back against this tide of disinfo. Carlos Hernández-Echevarría is the Associate Director of Fundación Maldita, a nonprofit organization based in Spain that focuses on fighting disinfo and creating more effective policy that addresses the root causes of that problem. And Giulio Coppi is a Senior Humanitarian Officer for Access Now. He has more than 15 years of experience internationally, often in crisis contexts. Great to have you both on the program.
Thank you.
So Carlos, you were closely monitoring what was happening in Valencia in 2024 during the floods. I want to remind our viewers, there was catastrophic flooding, streets turned into rivers, houses were engulfed, more than 200 people died. Carlos, what information was filling your feed at that time?
I think this, as any natural disaster, any big catastrophe that calls a lot of attention, it's seen by many people as a wonderful opportunity to disseminate disinformation. And I saw so many false viral stories, basically trying to pit people against each other, and particularly targeting the same organizations that were acting as first responders. I remember so many hoaxes and false accusations against the Red Cross, the Catholic charities, basically organizations that were on the ground, and yet they were the target of disinformation campaigns, targeting their motivations, accusing them of only helping foreigners and not Spaniards. It was pretty ridiculous if you were on the ground those days, but millions of people saw those allegations and millions of people believed them.
When you looked at the information, what was the most striking narrative of disinformation that really stood out to you, Carlos?
There was many about, for example, the Moroccan government being behind the floods with, basically a weapon to manipulate weather. There was all kinds of weird stuff those days online, but I think the main narrative or the main motivation for many of these actors was actually to get rich or to get attention. Those people were saying, do not donate to the Red Cross in Spain, give the money to me and I will distribute it. So I think it wasn't a coincidence. I think it wasn't out of lack of understanding of the reality. It was for many of these actors an exercise in scamming and grifting.
Yeah, there's often scams tied into all of this. Giulio, I want to ask about, why is it that humanitarians seem to have such a bullseye on their back?
This is an excellent question. I think the reason why humanitarians are an especially good target is because they are often exposed to media and attention. They get thrown in the spotlight. And they are an easy target for two main reasons. The first one is that they cannot defend themselves. They cannot call out abuse. They cannot say who's behind some of these campaigns because of the principles of neutrality, because of the principle of impartiality. They are usually impeded from calling out the authors of these campaigns. And this make them especially vulnerable. Another aspect is that they are usually very limited in their outreach. When they go online and when they go on social media and they try to send a message through, they expose themselves even more. So they usually become even a bigger of a target.
Interesting. Carlos, are there patterns that emerge, not only in Valencia, but as you see disinformation and other humanitarian catastrophes? Do you think there's patterns of this disinformation?
Yeah, I think there definitely are parents. I think everybody is looking for information on social media. Everybody's eager to know more. And there is kind of a specialized sector that is trying to put out there very, very attention-grabbing headlines and stories. So we always see people trying to make things even worse than they are in reality. So, for example, you will always see people trying to do things like do not drink water from the tap, or do not go to this place or the other. And those are sometimes completely made up allegations, but people is so anxious to get information that we are all basically feeding the beast by sharing stories that are not confirmed. And so I think in that is the biggest pattern that emerges. A lot of people trying to ride the wave or of public interest with false stories.
Giulio, who is behind that messaging?
It can be sometimes states. Sometimes it's states, sometimes it's warring parties, sometimes it's hacktivists, sometimes it's online groups, sometimes it's rumors. It can be anyone. We have multiple examples of countries manipulating the information environment to get rid of an uncomfortable humanitarian presence.
Carlos, in Valencia, do we have any idea who those scammers were?
They were the ones that as I was mentioning, the ones who wanted to make money. So when they wanted to divert the kind of funding and donations that would go into these humanitarian organizations during a catastrophe. And there were always these people who are always interested in degrading institutions. We actually had pretty solid evidence of foreign powers disseminating content that was clearly designed to give the idea of public authorities being not only ambivalent but also corrupt or outright acting against the interests of the people affected. So there was people clearly into this with ideological and also financial concerns in mind.
And talk to me about the people impacted by that bad information in Valencia.
Oh, it was terrible because in the first 2 weeks, in the aftermath of the disasters, when the rescuers and the first responders were actually still trying to get people and rescue people and get basic services back in many of these localities, they had to fight additionally with these disinformation campaigns. And honestly, if you are in one of these small towns that had been disconnected from every kind of public service for the last 5 days. And the first thing they know is that, is someone telling them that the Red Cross is not helping and it's only helping other people because they are brown skinned, for example. It is, some people will take their absolute desperation to the first responders that get to their door, and there will be threatened violence, and there will be real consequences of that. So I think it affected greatly the reputation and ability to work of first responders, but it also preyed on the desperation of many people who were there and affected their ability to find resources and to actually get the help they needed at that moment.
Giulio, how long does it take to rebuild that trust after something like this happens?
That can take forever. It really depends on how much the organization is known and how much it is respected. And it also depends on the information environment. But usually it can take from months to years to reestablish a relationship of trust with the communities because the suspicion lingers. The fact that, yeah, but I heard that some times ago you did that, or it happened to me in my past work as a field humanitarian person, that people 10 years later still repeated something that they heard that what my organization or a similar organization in the same region did, which wasn't true. And it kept going as a hearsay for years and years to come. And you have to rebuild that trust. It's not enough to say, no, look, that's not true. It doesn't work like that. You really need to rebuild from scratch.
Carlos, what needs to change, to prevent this type of information from getting such a foothold in a crisis?
I think it's we need to discuss the role of the major digital platforms and whether or not they are equipped to deal with this kind of thing during a disaster. I think it's extremely important for them to work with civil society and particularly these organizations working in very difficult environments to understand how these disinformation patterns become dangerous for people on the ground, either the first responders or the affected parties themselves. I think they have a long way to go. And I think, for example, traditional media is subject to particular rules when it comes to natural disasters or emergencies, and they have to fulfill a public role in disseminating trusted information and for example, official announcements of evacuation. And I don't think we are demanding the same of the kind of information channels that are that the social media represents today. So I think they need to have a responsibility that it's equal, at least to the kind of power they have these days. I think first responders and these humanitarian organizations, they are too busy doing the real work to also have to worry about this stuff.
Giulio, who or what should be held accountable, especially when we're talking about life and death here?
Well, first of all, there should be some mechanism that allows humanitarians to call out those responsible without them being dragged in the spotlight. The case of the International Committee of Red Cross being, exposed through a campaign by a government, a campaign that was, by the way, led by a private company that is specialized in this kind of online manipulation. So this is a physical company with an office. The fact is, this is an example of OSINT, of open source investigations by journalists, by a coalition of journalists, calling out the authors. This is why humanitarians cannot do it themselves. They cannot go out and call out a government or call out the responsible. So someone has to do it. So the first thing is that we need mechanisms for investigation research through the media, through academia. And then we need mechanisms for accountability. But first and foremost, we need companies, as it was said by Carlos, to live up to their ambition. You want to be a global player, then you need to put the investments in terms of human rights teams, in terms of hostile actors and behavior and threat monitoring. You need to throw in the investment and the skills and the training and the networking when a crisis happens. That will allow you then to be able to respond adequately.